Happy holidays, everybody. Welcome into this edition of Warchant TV, joined by Corey Clark, senior lead writer for Warchant.com and managing editor of the Ultimate Seminoles sports source, Irish OFL. I'm Aslan Hajavani. Thanks so much for joining. Hit that subscribe button in the lower right corner of your screen. Maybe even hit the thumbs up button. We would much be obliged. So we've broken out some of our roundtable questions into video format for some more extensive conversation, gentlemen. And I guess as we talked about this off camera, we went into the 2020 season, I think, with varying levels of expectation for this team. I don't think anybody on this screen right now, most people watching it as well, did not think Florida State would end up 3-6. So simply put, Ira, what was the disconnect? What led, I guess, to the 3-6 record? What was the biggest factor, perhaps underperforming, to lead to that result?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably one of those things where we could list off a bunch of things. I would think the overriding thing that I didn't, and I think we could touch on some positions as well. But I think the biggest thing, the biggest overarching theme to me was I didn't realize how difficult it was going to be for a new coaching staff to reach the players. And I think I think a lot of us, we saw some excitement coming into the season. We know that there was I won't say a disconnect with the former coaching staff, with Willie Taggart's staff, but there were a lot of players that were not happy under Coach Taggart's regime, that felt like, especially the older players that had seen what practices were like under Jimbo Fisher and what the system was like then. And they felt like, what Taggart and that staff were doing didn't reach to the same level. So I think I, and probably a lot of people, expected that these the players would just buy in right away to what Norvell and this staff were pushing, and that obviously didn't happen. I mean, I think with some players it did, and I think with some players it did as the season went on. But I just don't think you can look at FSU's overall talent and FSU's just athletic ability, especially on defense. I don't think there's any way you could say those kids really bought in and did everything they were asked to do. Now, you can point to the pandemic, you can point to other reasons as well, but to me, that's the biggest thing. I thought that the players, especially the older players, would buy in to a new regime just because they had been so poor the last couple of years. And obviously that didn't happen.
Corey, what do you point to as you perform your postseason autopsy over at the Clark Manor in northern Georgia?
Right. Well, if you'd have told me before the season that Hampson Nasruddin would play essentially 3 quarters, Tamorrion Terry would score 1 touchdown, Marvin Wilson and Corey Durden would combine for, I think, 2 tackles for loss, I would have told you, yeah, they might win 3 games this year. Like, there's no way, whether there was a disconnect or not, and there clearly something was up on the defense, you did still have some NFL talent. I think the reason we were so optimistic going into the season is you had seen Marvin Wilson, Hampsa, Tamorrion Terry, Corey Durden. Asante Samuel was the only one of like the 4 or 5 big-time guys that we thought this team had that played up to the level we had seen them play. Everybody else looked like a 2-star recruit or got 2-star production out of him. I don't want to kill Hampsa because he didn't play. He was rehabbing. But if you'd have told all of us before the season, you're going to get basically zilch from all of those guys. And James Blackman's going to have to be your starting quarterback because the 2 guys that you probably want to play are both going to be hurt through all of August. I mean, I don't know that I would have predicted more than 3 or 4 wins. I mean, I think it played to its talent level if you kneecap the best players on the team, which is exactly what happened. That might be too simple. I'm not trying to make excuses for this coaching staff. I'm not trying to make excuses for Adam Fuller because there's no excuse for how that defense looked. But Tamorrion Terry scored 1 touchdown.
But isn't that part of the overreaching concern also? That, I mean, you had a guy in Tamorrion Terry who was, one of the most athletic wide receivers in the country. I've never felt he was the most complete by any stretch, but obviously a great talent. And even before he opted out, it didn't seem there were constant issues. He's bickering with coaches. There were questions about early in the season whether or not he was going to opt out. He was part of that whole mix with Warren Thompson and DJ Matthews. He had tweeted some things along those lines as well. And then you had the Marvin Wilson issue. Yeah, I mean, he was hurt at the end of the season and couldn't play. But, he had his issue during the summer with the coaches. And then he also, even when he was playing, it wasn't like he was playing at a really high level. So I don't know that you could just say, oh, well, it's just all injuries or it's all circumstances. they also had some really good players that didn't seem to buy in. And again, I'm not saying that that's necessarily Mike Norvell's fault or this coaching staff's fault. I think I just underestimated that more guys wouldn't fall in line, because in a lot of the guys that stayed, you look at that defense and you just can't tell me that those guys couldn't have played better than they did. I mean, you didn't see the great effort. And as the season went on, we started hearing more about guys playing with better effort, but that clearly wasn't there for at least half the season.
Yeah, I think, but part of it too, Ira, is like, even if you don't like your coaches, and not everybody likes your coaches, all these guys were in money years. You would think you would just say, okay, well, I've got 8 or 9 games to prove myself. Like Marvin Wilson's going to have to bust his butt at the Senior Bowl to get drafted where he would have gotten drafted last year if he hadn't come back. So that to me was surprising. That and no, I don't. Marvin Wilson was a little banged up. Corey Durden was a little banged up, but they were out there. I mean, defensive linemen are always going to be a little banged up. But yeah, like I said, so out of the DJ Matthews was our 9th ranked guy coming into the season on our Warchant top 40. So 5 of the top 9 guys on the team didn't do anything at all, unless you count Tamorian Terry's 1 touchdown against Notre Dame. Just that would be hard for a lot of Florida State teams in the past if you took their top 5 of their top 9 guys and they just didn't play well at all. But I know what you're saying.
Aslan, help me out here. DJ Matthews left the program. I mean, again, I think that speaks to my.
I wasn't, but you're acting like we're having a disagreement. I was expanding your thought, whether it was a disconnect with the coaching staff or not. When you take a step back and look at this team and why they went 3-6, well,
right,
none of their good players did anything. I mean, it's as simple as that. For whatever reason, the coaches certainly aren't absolved of not getting these guys to play hard. But yeah, if you'd have told me Tamorian Terry was going to score 1 touchdown and Marvin Wilson was not going to have a sack, and Hampson Nasruddin will play 3 quarters all season, I'd be like, yeah, they're going to really struggle. And they did. They proved me prophetic in hindsight.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I guess, this was probably supposed to be some sort of a compelling, divergent opinions thrown back and forth. But ultimately, I guess the biggest surprise is, to Ira's point, the fact that I thought it was going to be a 1-year flip, at least maybe not New Year's 6 bowl flip, but at least 7-8 win flip. And the fact that we didn't see that kind of instant payoff, I figured these guys, after having seen the way Jimbo Fisher coached and then seeing the way that Willie Taggart coached and then seeing the way that Mike Norvell came in, would kind of be reinvigorated and back on the boat. I heard something on a podcast with Damian Woody, who said, like, he played for the Patriots and then he went to the Detroit Lions. And he says, like, when you've been around great coaching and then you go to bad coaching, it just really drives it home that much further, just how far away you are from the top. And I thought, those guys like Emmett or Marvin, Hamza, who didn't play all that much, the guys had been recruited by Jimbo and came to Florida State because of what Florida State was, would have had a better appreciation for what Mike Norvell was trying to create. But for whatever reason, it did not take to nearly enough players to get anything really accomplished that they wanted to in year 1. And then the defense, right? Then the defense, simply. We all thought there's no way it could possibly get worse. It got worse.
No, we thought it would get better. I mean, that kind of goes to that whole theme. I mean, and Corey's right. I mean, if you don't have Marvin Wilson, if you don't have Asante Samuel, I mean, those are huge reasons that the defense was decent at times in the 2 years before this coaching staff got here. And with Marvin not contributing much, Corey Durden not contributing much, and Hampson not being available to the last couple of games. And I mean, Asante was the only guy that really lived up to the billing. But I thought you'd have better coaching at linebacker. I thought you'd have better coaching at defensive end. I thought you'd have better coaching possibly in the secondary, or at least more engaged coaching at defensive end. And I thought you'd have better coaching in the secondary. And I thought the players would respond to that. But instead, you watch like the NC State game, you watch the Louisville game, the Notre Dame game early, where it just looked like guys were doing whatever they wanted to do. And, and again, I'm not saying that the coaches, everybody wants to focus on Adam Fuller and the scheme, and people say, these schemes, he's not ready for this level. The schemes are, I don't know that that's true. There's no way some of the things they were doing on Saturdays were part of a scheme. I think you just had guys doing what they wanted to do in certain circumstances. Now, the good news is a lot of those guys are leaving and or have gone. So, I mean, I guess that would be my question about the defense. If you don't have as much talent, because you're not going to have as much talent when you lose Hamza, Marvin, Asante, Corey Durden, and a couple other guys. But if everybody's doing their job, if the guys who are remaining really buy in, can you see some improvement next year?
I mean, you could. I guess I shouldn't say it, but it's hard to imagine them being worse. Would they have to be dead last in the country? Which I guess they could be, but I mean, there's never been a Florida State defense like that. So yeah, I think look, the problem with a bunch of 2- and 3-star players that are non-NFL types, you can't beat the Alabamas and the Clemsons of the world with a bunch of 3-star dudes on defense running around. You just can't. But you can beat the Wake Forest and NC States of the world and the Georgia Techs. And so I do think that if you get rid of guys that didn't buy in, or guys that just, look, Janarius Robinson, God love him, he was the only defensive end that had any sacks this year. But he's leaving. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing for this defense. Some other guys need to show that they can play, or at least get a chance to play, because we saw what 11 was, and he wasn't anything special. Still love you, Janaris. But
Sean Fuller, Josh Griffiths is going to be better. Not that I think Janarius Robinson is.
I mean, I was going to say you would hope by their second or third year they'd be better than what 11 was in his whatever it is.
Barely saw them. I mean, these guys are coaching for their lives every week practically, or at least trying to get maybe guys ready for the future. But at no point did they cut the cord on 11 or 13. They kept rolling them out there.
No, and I think part of that is because they're older guys that were still on the roster. They hadn't at least bounced, so you want to reward them for not bouncing. And it sounds like they really do like Kendo as a guy that works hard and is a good teammate. So, but again, that guy, Hampson Nasruddin, had as many tackles this season as Josh Kendo, and Josh Kendo played the entire season. So you're not getting a ton of great production from defensive end. And yeah, they're not going to be anything good. They're not going to be anything special again next year. They're not going to be good next year. But if they're in the right place, if they're competently coached, if they make it hard for teams to go score and maybe get, 2 punts a half, then it'll be a step up. Now, can that happen? I don't know. But, I thought they played best against the run when Marvin Wilson wasn't on the field. In those last 2 games, they actually played last 3 games, they played pretty decently against the run, and Marvin Wilson was nowhere to be found he wasn't on the team. So I don't know what that says, but it says something.
Or a Corey Durden. And that was the other thing. That was my other answer I pondered with this was when you talk about biggest disappointments, I would say the defensive tackle position, defensive line position, I guess, and wide receiver on offense. I mean, those 2 positions, I don't know that I thought the receivers were going to be great this year by any stretch, but with Terry and DJ Matthews and Keyshawn Helton come back from injury and some of the other weapons they have, I thought they would get some good play out of the receivers. And it just evolved into really nothing. But it was almost like they were playing games without wide receivers the last couple of weeks. And that to me was stunning.
I mean, flipping it forward, if they use these last 6 or 7 seats they have at the table for this signing class to sign grad transfer, or whether just not even grad transfer, but just guys that can produce on the defensive side of the ball, because to your point, Ira, them not being coached to look that bad. I saw this video or this clip on Twitter of LSU defenders, and like 3 of them were literally looking just around each other, not knowing what to do, and Bo Pelini got fired. Like, we never saw Florida State look confused. Like, they were lined up correctly. So if they're in their right, if they know their alignment and their assignment, but they can't execute, then you're thinking, well, maybe it's a talent issue. So if they can infuse themselves with maybe a pass rusher at defensive end, maybe a couple linebackers, maybe another defensive back, then you could hopefully see this thing getting better, because it does seem like they're going to stand pat with Adam Fuller. But if they don't get transfer guys on that side of the defense, what they have right now on this roster, Derek McClendon and True Thompson and Malcolm Ray, I don't know if those guys are answers and plug and play fixes. So we'll know soon enough, though, because they're only going to take a few days off and get back to off-season workouts. So who knows? When this drops, they might be working out. Who knows? So we will adjourn. But I usually have something to say. Like, always feel like I cut us off too soon. Do you have any other last parting words as we wrap up?
No, I was just going to say that there were a couple other players in there you didn't mention. Dennis Briggs, I thought, showed some potential as the season went on when he came back. Derek McClendon, I think, has some ability. So I think they have some guys on the defensive line that you can see some possibilities with. You also brought in, there are a couple of those guys they brought in the defensive backfield last year's transfers didn't really materialize, but maybe they will next year. Miko Dotson was banged up for most of this year. Hopefully he gets back to full health. and Jarian Jones I think missed some time. Renardo Green missed time. So they've I think there's guys that I don't know if the verdict is out on some of those guys. So maybe that'll work out and pay some dividends for the Noles in 2021.
Verdict is in, though, right? Verdict is in on those guys. We'll see. We'll see how they go. All right, we'll be back with another one of these. It'll probably be more uplifting because it's the holiday season after all. For Corey and Ira, I'm Aslan. Thanks for watching this edition of Warchant TV.